So, Professor, can you talk about how that style is um, transferred to the residential design?
Sure, modern architecture shows up in residential design in a number of ways. There are some international style examples that have the steel skeleton with lots of glazing. You don't find very many of those in mid-Michigan. More likely you find buildings that were influenced by the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. And there are several buildings or homes by Frank Lloyd Wright in mid-Michigan. And then there are a lot of architects who did the kind of prairie style, low buildings, especially on the street side that look one story, that are fairly close to the street. And then on the back, you tend to have big areas of windows or sliding doors that open to the outside. So in the prairie style, you have a flexibility of the design. You no longer have rooms that are closed off from each other that have particular functions like a dining room and a living room, but you might have spaces that flow into each other. This in part is a result of the changing lifestyle, the informality of life after the war, the new, having an increase in leisure time, so people have living rooms and where they do things, and the wife is no longer delegated to the kitchen. So you have kitchens that open up into the dining and the living area, and the whole family kind of works together.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of residential design, in your book it was very well documented, the modern residences here in the mid-Michigan area. Can you talk about any one of them, if any one of them is your favorites, or every single one of them in a group? I don't know if it's fair to group all of them together, but yeah. Do you have any favorites?
Some of my favorites, of course, are Frank Lloyd Wright houses, and I'm very familiar with the earliest of the houses, the 1939-40 Usonian, built for Alma Getch and Catherine Winkler. There's just a wonderful story connected to a larger group of, or community of faculty who got together and went to Wright and asked him for designs. Unfortunately, only one of those buildings, the Getch Winkler, was built. So Alma Getch and Catherine Winkler were art educators. They had a wonderful sense of aesthetics. They worked very well with Frank Lloyd Wright, and the house is as it was designed in the 1939 and finished in 1940. That is unusual for Wright houses because they tend to be on the smaller side and there are additions or changes, and so this is a perfect gem. It is an absolute reflection of what they wanted and what he wanted. So aside from Wright, and there are 3 other buildings with wonderful stories connected with them, the architect that I enjoyed learning about, who has a mid-Michigan connection that people didn't know about, is the architecture firm of Keck and Keck. They were 2 brothers in Chicago. I found one house that was designed but never built, and it's a question as to what happened. The documents just stop. But the other house that was built is right next door to one of the Frank Lloyd Wright houses and across the street from another one. So they were all being built at the same time. Again, something I didn't really realize that it's a cul-de-sac and lots of activity was going on. And what's fascinating to me is the correspondence between the Pansions and Keck and Keck. And because the Pansions had been in that original group that had hired Wright, they were very pleased that Keck and Keck were so much easier to work with. But Lucy, the wife, ended up writing some wonderful letters to Keck and Keck talking about moving in and feeling like they hadn't lived before, that now they could see the stars and the changing of the seasons in ways that they couldn't before. And that was enabled because the whole back of the house facing the backyard is windows. She didn't want a separate dining area. She didn't want her kids to have to clean up before dinner. So she had a lot of desires for the house that reflect this informal lifestyle. But she also had a very good sense of what it meant to a family's life together, living in a building that is so modern and informal.
Such a profound effect, and I can conclude that it is mostly because of the design of the residences. Can you talk about that a bit? What kind of psychological effect do you think that had in terms of the family unit?
I think living in a house that is designed aesthetically, that where you have a sense of volume and connection and view from one to another, is just so much different than living in a house that you simply bought. That you have a connection with volume and space and light and air. These are things that a house from a kit doesn't really have. So I think it develops a sense of aesthetics in a person. You become more aware of other buildings as a result, and how rooms work and how you move through space in them, and then what they look like on the outside.
Mm-hmm. And talking about the residences here, Frank Lloyd Wright designed only one of them. I mean, he designed a couple of others as well, but they were never built. So,
well, actually, Wright designed total 12 houses for the area, and 4 were built.
4 were built.
Yeah.
Yep. My bad. So, can you talk about the local architects here who kind of propagated this modern design in terms of residential spaces?
Yeah, so the majority of modernist homes in our area were designed by local designers. There were several large firms. We don't know about them anymore, although their buildings are still there. And I've become a great admirer of Kenneth Black. He's the designer of the Lansing Public Library and the City Hall. And what I've come to like and understand about him was that he was very flexible in his ideas. He starts off in his father's firm in a very traditional, sort of Romanesque kind of style. He did colonial houses. Lansing City Hall is international style. That was what the client wanted. Shows your forward thinking. He did the Lansing Public Library that has a little bit more ornament. His own home that he designed in Lansing has a lot of ornament, curves, counter curves, so it's moving quite a bit away from that slick, unornamented style. But some of the houses he did are also very Wrightian, either because the client wanted that or because he felt it was it could relate well to an informal lifestyle. So Kenneth Black is one architect who's very important locally, and he was known regionally. He was active in the national scene and with the Architects AIA, the American Institute of Architects. Another local firm, Laitla and Nuchterlein, nobody even has heard of them, and they did a lot of schools, they did churches, they did some fabulous houses that have butterfly roofs and ceilings inside that reflect the angle of the butterfly roof, wonderful fireplaces around which the whole space resolves. And I keep on finding more of those. So my research, I think, is incomplete, and I'm sure I keep on hearing about more houses, so it's a start.
Can you talk a bit about that? What more houses have you heard about after writing your book? Anything that pops out? Anything that you might want to include maybe in your next book?
Yes, I knew about several houses on the west side of Lansing on Delta River Drive, and I put them in a footnote. They're modern, late 1940s, but I couldn't find anything about the architect. And I've recently found out it was a female architect. I don't have the name yet, so that gives me a little bit of a lead to follow up. There's another Kenneth Black house that I heard about. I could only put it in a footnote, but it's a fabulous house, and it's right next door to the Getchwinkler by Frank Lloyd Wright, and deserves a little bit more research.
And in terms of spreading this idea of modern design, do you think the local architects help that, or do you think because of the popularity of Frank Lloyd Wright that kind of supplemented it? What do you think?
I think you need to I'm not exactly sure what, if you could rephrase